Welcome to the first session of seminar To Draw Away Matter, Space, and Time from Media and Meaning by Boris Ondreička. To draw away takes its name from the Latin root of abstraction, abs-trah, to pull away from the material object, and from the Greek aphairesis, things that exist from removing. Drawing itself, originally figurative, names the act of dragging a stylus across a surface. This seminar follows that double etymology across the entire historical trajectory of abstraction in visual and broader cultural production, from paleolithic mark-making to the present drawing on psychology, ophthalmology, neurology, psychiatry, theology, art history, philosophy, and politics. The surface of abstract art is globally accessible precisely because it operates outside of the structures of formal language, untethered by any single cultural context. Non-figurative, non-objective, non-representational. Abstraction is defined by negation, yet what it negates opens onto esoteric inner vision, touching the transcendental and metaphysical. It encompasses revelation and apocalypse, entoptic phenomena produced directly by central nervous system, and the involuntary imagery of psychedelic intoxication and sensory deprivation. It was also, after World War II, an American export deployed in the promotion of individualism against Stalinist socialist realism. Without the abstract, as the seminar argues, we cannot get closer to truth or its knowing. This seminar is suitable for students of art and art history, emerging curators and artists, collectors, and all serious lovers of art. It is a first installment of the long-term intersecting curatorial studies program beginning in September. Session 1, on abstract, abstraction, and abstract art in general. This session establishes the conceptual and historical ground, tracing abstraction from its etymological origins through its development across cultures and media. Students are introduced to the core paradox that to draw away from the object is also to draw closer to something essential. Boris Ondreička is an artist, author, and curator, former director of an art initiative Transit, since 2012, curator at TBA 21 Vienna. He has also co-curated Rare Earth, Super Club, Tomorrow Morning Line, Olafur Elijah, Green Light, an artistic workshop, and recently 5 years project, Class of Interpretation, all for TBA 21, Manifesta 8 in Cartagena, Being the Future in Berlin, the event in Birmingham, UK, Stage Backstage in Frankfurt, Germany, individual projects of Louis and Franziska Weinberger, Stano Flico, Andreas Neumaster, Julius Koller, and many more. More recently, he has curated The Question of Will in OSF Bratislava, An Empire of Senseless, and Meat Factory Prague. Ondreička has co-founded the Society of Julius Koller. His artistic projects were exhibited in Manifesta 2, Luxembourg, Venice, Taipei, Prague, Torino, Athens, Kiev, Jakarta Biennales, MoMA PS1 NYC, BAC Utrecht, De April Amsterdam, SMAC Ghent, Tramway Glasgow, Fondazione Sandretto in Turin, Air de Paris, La Plateau, and Galerie Jocelyn Wolf, all in Paris, and many more, as well as Slovak, Czech national galleries. Succession Mumuk, TQ Vienna, Donau Festival Krems, Magazine 4, and the most recently Algorea at Gallery Cursor Rack. His High I.O. was published at Transit, 1 Second Out of Time at Revolver, and soon the retrospective of Spevnik at Brak. Ondreička is a regular correspondent of the Slovak Monthly Capital. Boris, you can take it from here. I'll pass the mic to you.
Many thanks. Hello. Is the sound okay? Yeah, okay, super. Okay, so hello. It's great to see you all here. First few details. Today's session will consist of my lecture, which will last about 40 minutes, followed by a discussion. Today I'll be focusing on more general questions about the abstract. I'll be drawing on my ongoing research, which I've been working on for nearly 2 years now. So the reservoir is already quite big. So afterwards, feel free to ask almost anything. Okay, so although the production of iconic, with likeness, figurative, recognizable objects and subjects is communicated as historically vastly dominating the to aniconic, without likeness, symbolic or abstract art. If you were to take into account Paleolithic creativity or regions where Islam, for example, is the dominant culture, and similar cases, vast history line, we would have to significantly adjust that striking disparity. I also know that aspect that the iconic is, for example, only a part of altars, while the rest of the architecture, as well as the entire material culture, which is crucially major, is aniconic. Today, according to platforms that incorporate statistical analysis into their research, sales of abstract art already of the Western formal normative understanding, as we know its development since the late 19th century, account up to 25% of the entire market and are beginning to appear as essential item in every private commercial gallery as well as in public museums. Although the abstract, even though it is still regarded as somewhat mysterious, is one of the most monumental themes. Both attributes, the most monumental but still mysterious, call for deeper research, which, to my knowledge, has not yet been sufficiently summarized, including how we perceive, process, and express the abstract at the biological, not only intellectual, emotional, or spiritual level. When it comes to visual arts, people tend to think they understand what the abstract is, those splotches and lines without depicting anything concrete. When it comes to instrumental music, it does not even occur to us that we are perceiving something abstract. However, as soon as we begin to explore it, even a very rudimentary investigation immediately reveals a multitude of associations that are not only difficult to analyze quantitatively, but some of which are also raise truly complex qualitative questions. The abstract is very convoluted territory that encompasses various disciplines, and in each one, the abstract can mean entirely opposite things. It is therefore useful to briefly outline at the outset what the abstract means in the fields of perception and cognition, philosophy and sociology, or what it means to designer of a TV remote control, for example. To Draw Away explores almost global context of abstract art from both a chronological and phenomenological perspective, both from theoretical and practical artistic, with ambition to provide certain knowledge of encyclopedic extent about praxis of the abstract. I myself am a graduate of painting, and I'm old enough to be still part of socialist realist training, so I'm very familiar with all classical techniques. I try to examine the abstract from perceptual, cognitive, intellectual, and creative and interpretative standpoints, both from cosmological, non-human as well, and ontological, human personal development positions. Since the concept of the abstract pertains to many disciplines, the nature of this work is also interdisciplinary, drawing primarily on expertise in art and philosophy or neurosciences in its basics, obviously. To Draw Away tries to reveal diverse natural, biological, and cultural double-sided mechanisms behind the abstract, both in the period of its cognition before, mental processing, creation during, interactive influence on recipients after, and at the end, the feedback of all. Once more, no artistic approach draws as heavily on other disciplines as the abstract does. Given its broad scope of influence, we could consider it the most intense intersection of all possible fields. And so we should examine this phenomena from a fundamentally interdisciplinary perspective. That is, not as separate atoms, but as a nervous amoebic molecule whose distributed complexity holds it together wirelessly based on the affinities of its fragments, thereby allowing even their antagonistic traits or poles, as mentioned. For example, that art uses it to open up, but philosophy to close off, to interact with one another. The highest level of human metacognition and expression involve the analysis and synthesis of information into abstract, novel, and meaningful forms, transcending direct sensory experience. These operational processes are rooted in executive function, control, language, and the ability to manipulate mental representations with creativity frequently regarded as the pinnacle of cognitive activity. Human cognition is fundamentally wired to operate with reality as an abstraction. From a cognitive and neuroscience perspective, all perceptions are ultimately best guesses, unconscious inferences constructed by the nervous system. Our conscious experiences act as a sensory veil rather than a direct window into an objective concrete world. Because of this, science increasingly views human perception of reality as a highly sophisticated, evolved abstraction. From this point of view, we must consider the abstract as extremely important and thus address it in depth. I argue that it is in art that we can find the most significant, exclusive, irreplaceable, but also somehow empirically the most accessible lessons in this regard too. Art can teach us not only to look, what eyes do, but also to see what brain does, which is nearly identical to know. Art contributes to improving sensitivity, sensibility, and intellect too. The abstract plays perhaps the most advanced, sophisticated, and vitalizing role here. From a neurobiological perspective, the perception of abstract art bypasses standard object recognition. Instead, it occurs in a hierarchical, bidirectional sequence of processing stages that transition from raw sensory decoding to complex emotional, cognitive, and motor interpretations. The brain's visual system mechanically deconstructs the artwork into its most basic elementary components like spots of light, lines, edges, color, spatial location, and geometric orientation. Because representational objects are absent, these raw features form basic groupings such as unity, compositional balance, and contrast that automatically capture initial attention. The visual processing stream separates into what and where pathways. Particular areas of brain which normally identify faces and scenes attempt to identify familiar patterns. In abstraction, these regions recognize forms but lack complete real-world context, creating a structural ambiguity that motivates the brain to continue searching for meaning, which drives towards subject rather than object. The brain shifts to top-down process, using past memories, associations, and learned knowledge about an artist's style, for example, to give sense to the ambiguous forms. Because no concrete object instructs the viewer on how to interpret the image, the prefrontal cortex engages heavily to fill in the gaps. This act of generating one's own ideas and interpretations triggers highly satisfying, rewarding cognitive states. The interpretation of forms rapidly translates into somatic and emotional responses. Brushstrokes, airbrush dispersions, drips, geometrical patterns, or kinetic movements activate the viewer's motor system, simulating, embodying the artist's physical actions. Emotional processing centers, especially the amygdala, evaluate the emotional valence, the mood or energy of the artwork, which directly modulates the brain's internal reward. For example, dopamine release, which is responsible for so-called like economy. The brain synthesizes all previous somatosensory, emotional, and conceptual data to formulate a final aesthetic judgment of preference, priority, and hierarchy. Because abstract art requires more subjective contribution from the beholder's share, it frequently recruits widely distributed circuits dedicated to self-referential processing, internal valuation, but also external dialogue with others. Abstraction comes from Latin abs, which means away, and traho, to pull, draw, from material object, to draw away. The abstract is imaginary, fictitious, speculative, general, vague, notional, ideal, falsely judged as unreal, hypothetical, conjectural, absent, immaterial, something that can't be experienced by the five senses, lack of causality, and single universal definition. The abstract is thus often misused, misinterpreted as a pejorative term implying obscurantism, which merely masks a disconnect from reality and consequently its uselessness for everyday life. This generally erroneous pejorative term, though it may be valid in specific situations, such as when we say that something is too abstract if you want to arrive at the more detailed description, understanding of the kind of final understanding of the situational constellation, fails to recognize that without generalization and filtering out the irrelevant, which are amongst the fundamental qualities of the abstract, we would not be able to take a single step forward. Complex network-level process distributed across several interacting areas of the brain, a modal abstraction or abstracting, is the irreplaceable aspect of transition from basic sensory responses to symbolic logic and/or higher intelligence. Speaking about symbolical, at the same time, human culture as such produces monumental phenomena that do not occur in nature and is thus, in fact, outside and opposed to the proclaimed raw reality. Let's consider just the aspect of justice, which is by definition an abstract concept, but whose consequences determine the bulk of our behavior and the economic systems that it produces, and they further organize it or organize us. Yes, all of this points to a problem with the definition of reality, given that pure natural reality is in many ways completely different from human reality, culture of human nature. That is why it remains important to distinguish between these realities. It's actually even more complicated than that, because when we talk about justice in democratic society, we are not thinking of simple equality, but rather we are trying to prioritize minorities and disadvantaged. In a paradox, democratic justice is asymmetrical, just trying to balance our inequalities. This seems even more critical today, given the rise of the identitarian and libertarian manosphere, which seeks to advocate a return to raw natural predation in quasi-Eolian sense. Another problem is the extreme difficulty of observing pure nature, since humans are now present almost everywhere. Thus, even the concept of pure nature can only be conceived through abstraction, to distinguish between cultural and natural debris, to draw that cultural debris away mentally, to imagine the nature without human. Without abstraction as cognitive economy focusing on essential formulas, building productive stereotypes that are easily stored in long-term memory, we will be not able to identify higher patterns and thus stay stuck in analyzing every single situation again and again, and thus being not able to live. The abstract is not under absolute control itself because, just like normative laws, it is open for interpretation and thus freer than other approaches to reality, but selected modes of the abstract try to control or even to build reality. It is something to be solved, or it is something what is solved. Speaking about symbolical, abstract is necessarily synesthetic in nature. For example, simple color has its evocative meaning, significance in relation to a given situation. the situation changes, or the color is placed, found in a different context, and can therefore take on a different meaning. Abstraction is thus an ongoing dynamic method of reaction and further processing. As is clear from all these parameters, the abstract has a strong tie towards future, is prospective and ambivalent because future is unclear itself. Abstract is an entering, welcoming summary of the content, conversion, derivative, compression, or distillation of a book, article, research, or speech as well. So it's also retrospective, or can be also very much retrospective. The abstract, of course, does not start with, even as is claimed later, somehow it does, is not reserved for art. Abstracting, even known much earlier, formally structured subject of philosophical discourse since Plato and Aristotle, 4th century BC, is a fundamental mental process of or result of isolating, filtering, simplifying, and generalizing concepts by drawing away, discarding specific details, context, and incidental characteristic to reveal and focus on core patterns, rules, or attributes. It enables cognitive functions like categorization, generalization, symbolic reasoning, and knowledge transfer across contexts, reducing complex information into manageable or symbolic representations, essential, fundamental, infra, or universal ultra forms. Thus, it has strong computational nature. In philosophy, abstraction is used to move beyond particulars of the world, the messy, changing individual things, to reach universals, the stable underlying truths. By abstracting, they claim to create systems of logic, ethics, and metaphysics that apply to existence as a whole rather than just one specific instance. If fact-based thought looks at what is here, abstract thought looks at what makes it what it is. Simplifying, philosophy is abstraction per se too. In computer science, mathematics, physics, and technology in general, systemic abstraction is used to manage complexity by hiding intricate, unnecessary implementation details, allowing developers to focus on essential features. It simplifies systems, enabling the creation of modular, reusable code and user-friendly interfaces. Abstraction also facilitates modeling real-world problems by focusing on relevant data and behaviors. In computer science, metalinguistic abstraction is the process of solving complex problems by creating a new language or vocabulary to better understand the problem space. Abstraction or meta-abstraction means taking a concept, process, or system that is already generalized and stepping back even further to analyze the nature of that generalization itself. It involves moving from doing or applying an abstract idea to studying the rules, patterns, and methods that make the abstraction possible in the first place. That is also where my essay aims to go. In sociology, abstraction is the intellectual process of simplifying complex social realities by distilling essential patterns, relationships, and structures into theoretical constructs. It allows sociologists to move beyond the chaos of specific everyday events and identify generalizable principles that explain overarching social phenomena like class or capitalism. Particular critical theories in terms of real abstraction between raw empirical data and ground theories in sociology identify structures and forces that operate independently of individual awareness and shape real social relations. So sometimes a macro abstract concept can help us understand what is actually happening to us better than the real experience of that micro-specific event itself, because amid millions of fragments we are busy with in certain moment, situation, we may lose sight of the whole or the true essence. In art, The abstract features, how we recognize it in the modern and the contemporary art, can be traced in the West back to decorative arts and or sfumato technique, 13th century, which means to evaporate or to vanish, from fumus, smoke, gaseous, soul, and spirit, and seen in the work of Francisco Goya, J.M.W. Turner, Victor Hugo. We will speak about Hugo later. Paul Serussier, or even James McNeill Whistler. And the entire aesthetic movement, or art and crafts during the whole 19th century, as a new domain of free art, highly individual, autonomous from contractor and any political dictate for its own sake, anarchic catalyzer of radical alternative social paradigms, as a consequence of the abolition of serfdom and the toleration patent. Abstract facets purer than in arts can be traced in graphic and painterly results of spiritualism, which is not necessarily artistic of the same era. However, as I will briefly describe later, the roots of abstract run much, much deeper. Artists use abstraction to convert and externalize feelings, moods, ideas, and perceptions directly onto particular material, often serving as a meditative or cathartic process. This cathartic or meditative process is partially transferable, accessible to the audience. That is one of the reasons why this kind of art appeals to discerning collectors who anyhow understand art only through anecdotes. Thus, abstraction in art, in its gestural and expressive fields, not constructivist or concretist, but we will speak about that later, runs counter in many ways to functional technical abstraction as a system of simplifying or concealing complex systems and reducing its interpretational fields. On the contrary, sometimes it is precisely their complexity or even primordial chaos, void, at least the essence, sense, structure, mechanism behind profane infrastructures, that it reveals open for infinite, immortal interpretation. We can argue that functional technical abstraction is useful while artistic abstraction is deconstructive in its core, as I will attempt to demonstrate in this text, with emphasis on highlighting internal ambiguity of abstract. However, much these disciplines may oppose one another. At a certain point, they both regard a particular stage of their creative process as definitive. For the technical discipline, this may be a conclusion. For the artistic disciplines, an opening. As perceptible, the abstract, in its overall scope, means many different and sometimes even opposing things in different disciplines. These disciplines can complement each other if there were a consistent interpretation or mediation, animation, translation between them. And so we can use it in direction of the master meaning and thus work towards plastic truths. Just as the abstract signifies a multitude of things, it is a kind of universal totality of ambiguity, a wellspring of endless and eternal possibilities, and in this extraordinary way, it characterizes specific features of contemporary arts and its era as a whole. Its polemical nature sparks dialogue. Dialogue, which means through speech, is a sign of dynamic exchange, relation of othernesses, so is a fundament of belonging, politics, cooperation, and progress. In general, we must consider all the ways in which art's imagining, and embodying capacities can serve us. Fruits of artistic praxis extend far beyond art per se and are therefore useful to a wide range of disciplines and intersubjective human relations if properly interpreted. I argue that abstract art is, in a sense, an organic or logical consequence of the deep desires, congenital, deconstructive, and divergent tendencies of the avant-garde since the mid-19th century at large. Contemporary art is a symptom or even syndrome. Its 19th century development is a matter of theology. Theology is crucial in diagnostics towards trying to heal the problem. I argue that abstract art, whether in its creation or reception, might be a direct path to the subconscious or even social, societal, and technical infrastructures, and can help us understand hidden or opaque neuroaesthetic patterns and processes perhaps more deeply than any other discipline. I argue that understanding and interpreting abstract art helps us to comprehend and speak not only about entire contemporary art in general, an absence of common critical categories and thus orientation and organization based only on ad hoc judgment and contemporaneity ad magnum significantly, but also in terms of meta-intuitive viewing of self-expression as modes of becoming, or better yet, of constructing the self. One of the guiding principles of this work is the common treatment and the designation of the intellectual and the primitive, loud and silent, both of which are equally significant in the abstract and broader. My initiative is also to demystify the general claims that abstract art is apolitical and elitist, thereby further highlighting its reach and essential importance. First and foremost, I'm a curator. The role of curator is essentially a bipartisan one, whose primary task is to foster consensus among the many stakeholders involved. So, I could describe my ambition as naturally horizontal, to present a para-encyclopedic overview of the marvel of abstract, which is both a noun, an adjective, an attribute, in its full breadth as a certain nonlinear compilation of educational aspiration. So, I do not shy away from making certain technical passages a bit more popular. To draw away is an ongoing research project, open proposal also for next publications or panel debates and other formats of cooperation. Just as I'm suggesting an institute of interdisciplinary approach from my perspective of a professional in contemporary art, I'm also considering, as I write, as I say, the potential accessibility of my study to those other disciplines. I'm greatly inspired by Eric Kandel and Semir Zeki, whose forms of research papers appeal equally to both neuropsychiatric and arts-oriented audiences. Okay, skip this. I should say a bit more about motivation, my personal motivation, because many years ago, at a certain point, I realized that there are some singers whose essential voices can make me feel ecstatic, or as if I've reached nirvana, whether they perform whatever, even when something completely silly. So there, my experience was purely aesthetic, very intimate and difficult to convey, stemming from the form, pronunciation, pathos of expression rather than the content. So quality was somehow ignored in that case. I can say my attachment was purely abstract. By form, we can thus mean certain changing, even amorphous, scattered processes and not just precise static shapes. My motivation for this research was an effort to understand those subconscious abstract mechanisms of perception, interactions with hidden memory and experience, let's say, occult algorithm of preference, priority, hierarchy, and order. Although we often discuss the power of algorithms today, there are so many factors, stimuli, schemata, proximities, recalls, routines, local cultural issues involved, that it is currently impossible to pinpoint a single one as the cause of this realm, obviously. Nevertheless, I will try to summarize as much and many of those factors as possible. However, no matter how transdisciplinary the scope of my work may be, however, my essay features many links to knowledge and publications of that nature. For those who need to dig deeper in the direction, questions of abstractions in philosophy, mysticism, sociology, and politics, biology, psychology, and neuroscience, mathematics, computing environments, or new technologies require their own expert contributions. This might be a question of commissioning next volumes of the series, and that will be marvelous, actually. Yeah, I mean, I realized how much it also how much the research itself serves as an engine of metacognition, a substrate for giving concrete form to my personal unspoken preferences of contents and values. And it has really helped me in these regards. So, if to abstract means to separate, to draw away, or hide certain aspects, then even when viewing a work of art, it is not enough for us to ask what is there, but also what is not there, what has been removed or hidden, and why, for which purpose. And if abstraction is also, in the opposite direction, a protective shield that filters our excess data so that we can get to the essence, then we must also ask what and why we filter also when viewing a work of art. In other words, abstraction is the intersection of two systems of preferences that may not share the same foundation in terms of content and values. Thus, the role of an expert also requires a high degree of detachment, depersonalization. To achieve this depersonalization, which is also a multiple level of abstraction, I need to know myself as well as the mechanism of abstraction, whether intuitive, spontaneous, or highly controlled. In short, this is the ambition behind my work here. An abstractor is a person who searches, analyzes, and summarizes information. That was known or coined in Britain in late 19th century as abstractor class, which was personnel established to handle rudimentary clerical work, bookkeeping, lodging correspondence, and telling records, largely transitioned from the older class of copists. So I am sort of administrator or expert in many cases is sort of administrator, an abstractor of art. So far, there are many other paragraphs, but I should open a discussion now, so I don't overload you with too many informations, and yeah, we will see. Chat. Okay.
Lynn, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. So no questions.
No, I have a question actually.
Yeah. Please.
Yeah, so I mean myself, I've been also very invested in the topic of abstraction. Recently, I've even, I think, wrote a small like paper also on the subject. And for me personally, the most intriguing factor about it is that, as you mentioned, there are no real possibilities of defining it because it's so contradictory in so many spheres. And even if we take one sphere, like philosophy, there were so many contradictions between like various philosophers actually in how they define abstraction that it's almost impossible to like trace back what does it mean, right? And I think that my stake is that in everyday life, let's say, it is mostly used in order to point to something that gets us way too far from the everyday perspective of things, or from the one that has been, so to say, considered a norm in a certain social group. So when someone says this is way too abstract, it means that it's not very common to say something like that. But on the other hand, if we look at the most abstract phenomena, which there could be, like, for instance, like if we start looking at the very root of physical reality of what goes, I mean, in the most concrete possible phenomena, the most concrete phenomena, then it also gets abstract right at the same point, because when we start thinking about bacteria or the small particles, then it's not imaginable, and therefore we get down again to the same problem of if it's the most material, it kind of should be the most concrete, but actually, in fact, it turns us back to this idea of being abstract. So in a way, in my personal small research about this subject, I concluded that basically it's like I mean, not an empty word. I don't mean it in a pejorative sense or in kind of like a negative sense, but rather that it's like it doesn't really have a content because we can twist it all the way around the way we want to a certain extent. And yeah, I guess my question is, how do you deal with this extremely fluent and transient nature of abstractiveness, which cannot really be traced or put together?
I think in general, but super simplifying, philosophy is looking for a consistency, and also you are looking for something what is consistent. Art is looking for controversy. Art is looking for ambiguity. So the consistency in art is a very dynamic process. It's a polemos itself. And once it's getting static, it's getting immediately deconstructed because of this, staticity. And to me, there is, as in speaking about individuum, for example, which means that it's something what is not divided. To me, that's one of the highest, social abstractions, like the individuum, because actually we are individuums. We have intimate parts, we have roles, and on spontaneous basis, we manage to balance this ambiguity. So I think it's abstraction is a great a learning field how the ambiguity can actually work and progress, how the controversy can be a very productive or even progressive force, that internal conflict which is constructed or which is just accepted, So I think this is so I don't see problem where you see problem. You know what I mean?
So you would say that you take it as a part of abstraction, that it's not very definable, and that for you it's rather like a field of possibilities. That the fact that, I mean, even when we go to individuum, for sure, like, I mean, I agree with you that it's the most, we treat it as the concrete thing, but actually, if we start to question it, what does it mean to be individuum? It becomes extremely abstract at once, and at the same time, maybe more concrete. So it's like the two poles that we don't really know what it means, because the more we abstract, the more concrete we get to the phenomena of what stands behind this concept, right?
Yes, but also like with dealing with abstract, with going like deeper to the phenomena abstract, and I claim that art is the best entrance. We can reach like different nuances. Like for example, like there is in a standard there is a contraposition in between CIS and trans. But also CIS does not have to be identified with social roles. So even the CIS can be in transposition. And so abstraction allows us to deconstruct the thing itself in arts from like searching and digging its internal proprieties, and then also to, if we compare it to like a normal life, like that actually we are doing it, because we manage our intimacy and we manage our roles and we balance them in between. Is this an answer or not?
I mean, it is an answer. I guess I have more. I mean, I don't just necessarily disagree with you. I just find that it's very, for me, it's a very important subject because, of course, all that you say is true, but it's also that exactly what I mean, that there is a certain constant chaos between these two definitions of abstractness and concreteness, because the more we build relationships, one could also say that the navigation between abstract and concrete, that this abstract concepts, they are like prejudices, for instance, in society, or like certain social norms. They're extremely abstract because they're not necessarily linked to each case, but then they also have very concrete consequences in actions and so on. So they are kind of interdependent, I think. The concepts of abstraction and concreteness to a certain extent.
In arts, abstraction and concreteness is not opposite. Because like when, for example, you trace the whole trajectory of so-called concretism or geometrical abstraction, they claim that they are digging inside of infrastructures of reality. So abstract and concrete are not opposites. In art, if there is any oppositum, it's abstract and figurative. And abstract itself can embrace any antonyms. It can really swallow any antonym inside of it, except this figurativeness. Huh? So, and that's why I think that also for other disciplines, it's the experiences of art are actually quite interesting. So also like in arts, like realism and abstraction, they are not opposite to each other. Because Russian constructivism, for example, one of their founding documents was called Realist Manifesto. Because they said that what they are doing is realism, but it's not retrospective, mimetic realism, but they are building the reality. So, so I think, I mean, this is of obviously like for art, as Henri de Saint-Simon said, that art is the fastest of all disciplines. And he said it because art has no obstacles. Huh? There is no contract. It's not serious. It doesn't govern, it's like it has a very vague explanation about usefulness, for example, like what it is for. That's why art can proceed much faster than any other discipline, you know, like the slowest of all artistic disciplines is architecture, you know. So so art is actually where all of those contradictions were tested, and many of them were actually revealed as non-contradictory, or at least to be in a certain like symbiotic matching together, working together.
I actually also meant to mention in the context of art that on one hand, when we think of abstract art as, for instance, Russian formalist, right, like Malevich and Kandinsky as well, then on one hand, it is considered abstract art, but on the other hand, they have written so much theory text to frame it, to concretize it, to, in a certain sense, to put it inside of a certain discourse, then it makes it, well, I mean, in my eyes, maybe it's even more concrete to an extent than some figurative painter who was, of course, he or they might have been doing a more like figurative art, but on the other hand, it wasn't so concrete because it was not put inside of this artistic discourse, for instance. And then also, what just crossed my mind that figurative art can as well be extremely abstract if the figurative, if what it describes doesn't necessarily symbolize what we see. So I mean that if we see the contours of objects, but they're actually not there to mimic the reality, but are there for other purposes. I think it's very vivid in some examples of cinema, for instance, that have some kind of narrative which could be taken as figurative, but actually, in fact, it's not, because there are some other underlying principles in it.
Yes, I mean this is another I mean problem. When we are speaking about the definition of allegory, allegory is a figurative embodiment many times of very abstract terms, huh? Like justice, you know, like we have justice, and then there is this like lady, and she has certain attributes. So also this is a very you know, it's a nervous network, and so we are stepping inside of this nervous network. While, like, when we go to the case of neurosciences, they are actually, you know, imaging, and then they are measuring, and then, you know, they do a evaluation processes of abstract processes in the brain. So so there it also means something different. There is, it's they are trying to squeeze the interpretational field to as low as possible, or as narrow as possible. So yeah, I mean, and also, like, you know, speaking about Malevich was also speaking about realism, eh? And so suprematism was the attempt of the governance, like you know, like even Malevich speaks about non-objective world. He speaks about world, and then I don't know, like 19th century spiritualists, they speak about emanation of body. But this is not only like 19th century Western art. It's also like 300 years before our era, Chinese theory of painting. So I think it's that the majority of abstraction in art deals with something what is non-objective and what is intangible. But it definitely has its you know, source of radiation. And what it exposes is to speak about, if we speak about human body, it speaks about necessary propriety of the body, the radiation as the necessary component of body itself. So that the limitation that the body can't be limited to its material or tangible meaning. So that's the point. And when we trace Chinese theory of painting, like the ancient texts, then you realize that actually they, even in a medicine, they consider these intangible aspects much more important than those tangible aspects. So abstract art itself deals with loads of practical issues, and also it deals with social infrastructures, with urban infrastructures, with architecture. Like when you trace the whole trajectory of how Piet Mondrian arrives to his squares, it's an enormously long trajectory of abstracting, so, and which is based on a very profound understanding of nature and urban nature especially. Yeah, so yeah, maybe I can go ahead somewhere. One thing what is also very important to say, that then when we are also dealing with what is like conscious, what is pre-conscious, what is subconscious, and what is unconscious. In abstract art heavily, we are dealing with spontaneity, intuition. We are dealing with automatic or ritualistic behavior or ritualistic production. We are dealing with a lot of experiments with various stimulants. We are dealing with accident. We are dealing with all kinds of introspective and metacognitive meditations. So abstraction itself in art does not have a limited territory. It's unlimited. And also maybe the only general meaning is that it's not figurative. I will just repeat that because that's very important, because it can be anything else. It can be square, it can be just splash, it can be just a gesture of hand, it can be just proclamation, it can be nothing. And actually, the whole trajectory of avant-garde since late 19th century actually was following this death drive of deconstruction to destruction and ending with nothing. So it's certainly, abstraction is certainly a certain method of we can even say that a certain kind of like a Gnostic legacy of deconstructing the material world to a very essential aspects of, let's say, existence, or becoming, to get rid of objectivity, to search or even to depict, embody the pure subjectivity or sensitivity.
To a question from Robert.
Hey, it's Rob. I don't know why it says Robert up there. It's okay. Hey, thanks. Nice to meet everyone. Mike, it was more of a comment, and it was like way in the beginning when Lynn asked the question about unclear definitions and not being able to define it particularly. So it's like more of a comment. And I have a question at the end, but it might have been about what we were talking about 10 minutes ago. Like I could just talk about a little bit about, like, for me as an artist, when I'm employing abstraction, because I often used to do more figurative, quote unquote, figurative stuff, and I disagree with this idea that figurative is not abstract, but it's more of a definition of like what figurative means in
Yes.
contemporary art. But for me, like, the abstraction is about the viewer a little bit, and this hints at some of the things you talked about, but it gives the viewer an opportunity to uncover the meaning of it and actually participate in the meaning of what they're looking at. Something that we live in, like, in a world in which, like, everyone is taking stances, and if we see something and we think we already know what it is, we already position ourselves and there's no thought process in it. So if you can hide is the wrong word, but if you can say something and keep some abstraction in it and let the thing that you're looking at unfold a little slower, it gives the viewer an opportunity to actually participate in what the thing means, and it might suggest something. I don't know, you talked about the subconscious. I think it's a little more complicated than that, but it might suggest something that they had done, or, like, I could be a little more specific. Like, I've done a lot of work that's about, like, contemporary political events, and if you just say what it is directly, everyone already has a stance about it, and there's no viewer. There's just like you're saying something, and it doesn't do anything to promote knowledge or participation in society or anything. So abstraction gives an opportunity to give the viewer. I'm also reminded, like you said, Boris, about conflict. Abstraction is conflict, and this reminds me a little bit about the idea of montage, in which, like, in a collage, things come together to form something that has a sort of meaningful whole. But in montage, images directly conflicting with each other, and it opens up a space for more possibility. Um, I mean, abstraction also, like, market, and it makes it easier for some collectors to buy stuff and hang it because it fits their couch. But that's a different thing. If I
We'll
had
speak about that.
but
Yes.
I have a question, but I come back to it. I have a question about something real material, but that was just a comment about how artists would employ abstraction. But I'll ask a question if you want me to, but I'll let other people chime in on the conversation too.
Now, I have a remark to what you say is that, you know, yes, as I said, a figurative allegory is many times a depiction of abstract abstract phenomena, like I said, justice, for example. But also, uh, uh, many abstract art, which looks like abstract art, even the most legendary, is actually misunderstanding. For example, and this is my remark to what you speak about, the interpretative field of abstract art. For example, Hilma af Klint, maybe the most of you know Hilma af Klint. She's considered as one of the pioneers of abstract art. But actually, what she was doing were diagrams, were theosophical diagrams. So actually, it's only apparent abstraction. For her, every color, every letter, every kind of line had particular iconographic meaning. So even if we feel that it's completely open for us to create our own associations with her work, this is not what she meant. Her messages were absolutely literal and very clear. Only she was not using, explicit literal language. So this is also like, some abstract art allows very huge interpretative field and participation, but some abstract arts are they have a very, very, very precise legend, and this is also just a matter of that abstract art itself is very layered phenomena, that it allows you to read of Klimt as, pure interface of your own associations. It actually irritates your brain to do it. But once you reach deeper or higher expert levels, you realize that actually it's she this is not what she meant. So that's my point.
Next up is Olivia, I believe, then Lynn, and then Rob.
Okay, I have in the meantime also I have the question in the okay, so then the John will be after. Okay, so you moderate.
Okay, Olivia, go for it.
Thank you. Hi. Yeah, I think my mental model to understand abstraction comes a little bit from economics, as that when we see an abstraction of something is because there was so much complexity that abstraction was needed to be built upon. So let's say there is a very practical problem and we're trying to fix that practical problem, and then that generates a second order problem, which generates a third order and a fourth order and a fifth order, and then
Yes.
that pathway is an abstraction. Like you're getting, and I think it comes from this meaning I'm seeing now of like the draw away. You're drawing away from something that couldn't be solved at that level of simplicity.
Yes.
And then you expand and add layers of complexity until maybe in like a certain level of abstraction you can look back at to that first layer with added information and perception. And I guess with feelings and with things that are naturally more invisible, abstraction becomes like the natural language of those of the feelings. And then maybe there are some things that are more concrete in nature, but that they still need abstraction as like a language for developing that, like for opening the invisible into something that is quite closed off. And I think my question is, what is the difference in your view from abstractive and symbolic?
This is, things are, to me, abstraction is a process, huh? So as you described it as a process, symbol is a, let's say something what is status, huh? It can be a status of abstraction. So, but otherwise there are not that many differences between these two domains, huh? Also, when you say that, and what I also read is that abstraction works in both ways. It opens, but also it closes. It opens, but also it filters. It works like the veil, Also, it is a very horizontal, but also it can be a very bird view perspective. So, for example, Italian futurists in 1930s, they started a movement which was called aeropintura, which claimed that actually life is getting so complex that actually we have to look at the life from above. So there is no, and not even in economy, there is no one function of abstraction, because some abstraction is made to open things, and some abstraction is made things to close them. Some abstraction, the limitation or hiding or withdrawing or taking out is everywhere. Kind of like a common technique, but the function is different. Like, for example, philosophy is trying to find universals. Art, in majority, is not trying to find universals, as this, romantic aspect of some part of abstract art, which is a complete, total field of interpretation and total field of participation, which doesn't say anything about what it says, So, yeah.
I believe next up is Lynn.
Yeah, I just wanted to shortly comment on what Rob said previously, and just to mention that I also explicitly disagree that figurative art cannot be abstract, because based on this definition, if we take the art which somehow evokes questioning in its viewers, then I think that any kind of plausible example of art, abstract, I mean, figurative or not, has this level of abstraction in order to pose, well, especially if we are talking about contemporary art, of course, because I mean, it's more difficult to look at it historically, although I dare to personally say that for me, most of the art historically as well, that a plausible piece of art also contains this element of abstraction in itself. I mean, abstraction in this definition that it doesn't allow a very straightforward definition of itself, that it becomes a certain sort of process to somehow make any kind of sense of it and to dwell upon what kind of phenomenon is it. And also just with this example of Klimt, I think there are also an opposite pole, that there are so many artists who copied, for instance, Malevich's work. Like, he had a whole school of students who were just repeating, well, not all of them, but some of them were repeating his methodologies. And in that sense, it was the opposite of this opening of the abstraction, in this meaning of not knowing what it is, because it was dogmatic, and therefore it was just following the footstep of already established doctrine. So therefore, I'm just going back sort of with the impossibility to define abstractness as such. Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, good. No, I think it's again, when we are speaking about like art history and art theory and etc., we need to establish a certain normativeness as well, which can start, dialogues like this. So obviously, yes, I mean, there is abstraction in figurative, and then there is even figurative in abstract art. And back to the symbol. So both figurative and abstract in arts are just symbolical definitions. They are not stable domains which we are not to discuss, So yeah. There is a remark of Livia here, but then the abstraction is the viewer and not the art itself. It's both. It's both, because it's it's a relation between the production and perception. So yeah.
Rob, you're next up.
Hi, Boris.
Hi.
I was just wondering what you thought of the position of abstraction in contemporary visual art today, because you mentioned at the start of the class that you were classically trained as a painter, and I'm thinking, I guess, in reference to the rise of crapstraction or zombie formalism within like art critical circles, and the canonization of the de-skilling of painting in general. So I'm just wondering if you think abstraction has maybe lost its relevance or its potency in the 21st century.
No, I think it's hand in hand with critique of our social constellations as being abstract relations. I think abstract is in absolute opposite. I think it has a rising boom, and also it is in practical terms, it is considered as the very safe path commodity on retail level, like commercial galleries, but also on the level of art fairs. It's more and more. And the principle is that abstract art does not use explicit language, and so is less rooted in local environments. So is more accessible to a general public. And as 2 years ago we had a kind of like extreme record in sales of abstract art in Hong Kong, which was 25% of all arts. And so I think both from political and social reasons and also commercial reasons, I can predict that abstract art will be a very, very strong domain, as strong as never was. Because of also of this elitism, also of that it is extremely difficult to differentiate between what is dilettante and what is the masterpiece. And this also gives, for dealers, it gives an opportunity to be specifically charming, towards collectors, but also towards institutions. So this anonymous aspect is somehow opening a very cynical market. And I do not critique the contemporary, production of abstract art. No, not at all. But I see that this safe path commodity aspect will bring it also to enormous prominence. Also, there are other aspects like, last 15 years, you have a lot of initiatives which try to take abstract art out of patriarchal and male-dominated histories. So there are more and more exhibitions which are dealing with feminine abstract art or queer abstract art histories, and also the global majority artists. So it's not. It also there are also tendencies to take it out of this, like, white male dominated histories.
So I work as a storage manager for art collectors, and I am seeing a trend that there's a move away from people collecting abstract art, at least here in London, and there are galleries shutting here on a weekly basis that basically show a roster of abstract artists. So I guess my question situates itself more with, like, outside of the economic prowess abstraction has had within painting. Do you still think it's relevant in the 21st century when it feels so derivative from time gone by? Like, it's a rehash of, I don't know, 60s abstract expressionism, for example. And I'm thinking more as well about, like, artistic movements. Like the 20th century was so ripe for different artistic movements. The 21st century feels like it hasn't really got going yet. And I do recognize the move away from, like, the white male dominated space within abstraction, and I think that is relevant, but I still think that's active and ongoing. So yeah, that was more my position with it.
No, sure, but like when speaking about abstract art today, we have to go out of painting, huh? Since last, I don't know, decade, we speak a lot about textiles. We speak a lot about ceramics and different media, huh? So this is also my kind of like a point. Like, for example, Sheila Hicks, she was just a textile artist in 1990s, and now she's like fine art, So and so there is a extreme revision also of something what we were not discussing, like for example or rarely discussing in 1970s or 1980s, like patchwork, like the patchwork collective productions were core of feminist discourse, but were not exhibited at the galleries or museums. And this is big.
Well, we can move to the question from John in the chat. He said, could you kindly expound on technical abstraction versus artistic abstraction, gestural, expressive, and how the latter is the method of deconstruction?
So the technical abstraction, like if we're, for example, speaking about this example of TV remote control, what's happening there that it hides as much of its internal mechanism, and it provides user only with the as limited possibilities as possible. While artistic abstraction is not necessarily doing it. The abstraction tries to open up the discourse to infinite relay rays of questions and answers and conflicts. The deconstruction, like I study the history of last 200 years of art or evolution of contemporary art from the position of divergence. I mean, art history very much exposes convergence. So, for example, like how avant-gardes were formed. But what actually happened in the momentum of formation of the avant-garde groups was an immediate divergence of individuals out of those trends. So, for example, like when we trace the history of the legacy of Cubism or trends which are related directly to Cubism, it has more than 81 derivates until now. So this like an extreme fragmentation of movements, which ended up with the dissolution of isms in general at the 1980s. That's a certain like the deconstructive and congenital deconstructive element of avant-gardes. In the same time, what our avant-garde started to do were to deconstruct the media itself, to deconstruct the frame, to deconstruct the composition, to deconstruct the material, then leaving, I don't know, canvases unstretched or folded or burned or even, creating self-destructive mechanisms. And I see this as a principle of avant-gardes as a certain congenital code from the very beginning of avant-gardes, or as a formative element of avant-gardes, this self-destructive, self-deconstructive, and self-destructive aspect. And when we, for example, see kind of like a very dialectical evolution of Cubism, it was getting more and more fragmented. So it turned to abstraction dialectically. So that's some abstraction is a result of a certain deconstructive dialectics, which, as I say, I consider as being a congenital parameter of avant-garde itself.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Peggy, does she still have a question? Because she was next in line. And if not, then we will move on to a question from Michelle.
I was just going to make a comment that I really see abstraction as basic to being human. I just spent a whole week teaching 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds, and all they did was make abstract drawings. And they talked about them and they shared it. And that's how they made sense out of their limited abilities to draw and the world around them. And that's all I wanted to say is I just think when you get too much into systems and abstractions, then you're excluding parts of reality. But you need abstraction in order to be able to talk to each other and to live in this world. And I know you made that point, Boris.
Yeah, and also that was this is partially supports my argument to Rob, you know, like why I predict the rise. This is one of the where I see one of the reasons of potential rise of abstract art.
Right.
Also,
and I think it's a lack of elitism too, because we all do it. Everybody can understand it. So it makes it very accessible if you're not trying to interpret what the artist is trying to do. And
yes,
you make it about yourself and your perception.
yes, yes. What was actually, you know, like the Karl Marx critique, he used abstraction or abstract relations as a critique of society. I have a very neutral stance in it. I think that as now we are discussing here, abstraction can be actually very unifying and the place of symbiosis, the tolerance, solidarity, you know, so exchange.
And that's all I was going to say. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Michelle, go ahead.
So I know you commented a little bit on what you thought like the curator's role was in this landscape. I was kind of curious if you had thoughts on like what a critic's role would be. Because I know in the past, obviously, there was like a lot of prominence attached to being an art critic that has kind of changed or faded away in modern society and social media and all of that.
Yes, I think that critic or theorist, let's make it a bit wider, is the one who brings the language, you know, who associates a formal language or even a certain, you know, linguistic apparatus to what is happening in the non-linguistic environment. And I think this is the main function of criticism and theory. So as actually, you know, I mean, because, you know, from Greenberg to whomever, critics and theorists were not discussing only content, but also the language all around. There were several descriptions which were negated, and then there were other terms which were established. You know, like for example, speaking about Russian avant-gardes, the discussion about the surface of abstract art. You know, like a surface of painting. Which was not widely discussed because it was considered as a flat media. Huh? And then there is a very nuanced discussion about the flatness of or non-flatness of abstract painting throughout 50 years. And this discussion is actually not finished yet. So I think, yeah, I hope that criticism at the first will very much elaborate on the linguistic aspect of what is non-linguistic.
Do you think that since like I feel like a lot of writing about like institutions is declining or like in late stage capitalism, a lot of critics are more financially tied to institutions than they were in the past? Like, do you still think there is kind of like a meaningful configuration for that type of work? Like, or do you think there needs to be some sort of, I guess, kind of like impetus that reconfigures what being a critic means?
I think that's a very, very good question. And actually, like to me, I used when I speak about my research and what I would like to share with you, I call it praxis, which combines theory and practice. And so I also very much care about existential and ontological background of not only artists but also of theorists and critics and curators. So I think because of a global anti-intellectualism in the world, and especially in the realm of institutions, including journals, magazines, wherever, theorist and critic turns to be to the position of an artist who finances or who tries to find maintenance of the bare life, herself or himself. So I think as it was a case of, for example, of the mid-19th century and later on as well, we are reaching a very much DIY era again, which was not necessarily the domain of critics and theorists in the past, but in many cases it was. So I think, I mean, if you are a critic or theorist, you have to finance your research yourself or find mechanisms how to finance it.
I will think on that. Thank you.
But I think it's maybe I want to underline one thing. We should all learn from artists. We should all learn how artists survive, because the huge majority of artists, they are not living out of selling. They have a different ways how to survive, because they have a certain inner necessity to doing this shit. And I think the theory and criticism slips also to this level of being a product of inner necessity, because the institutions, they don't like us anymore. I mean, they might like us, but they are not open to pay anymore.
They are definitely not.
No, sure, but yeah. When you go through the list of loads of really prominent philosophers these days, they have to teach. They will not survive out of selling books, because the publishers, they will give them just a fucking penny for it, for writing a book 3 years. So I think it's when we are speaking about abstract art also, and we will speak about that also later in our next chapters of meetings, that there is also a certain economical, existential, and ontological aspect of these abstract endeavors.
Thank you.
Rob, go for it.
Okay. I already had a comment, so I'd gladly yield to someone else, but I could have a question, but unless there's someone else who wants to chime in, because I don't want to take up everyone's time. But you know, like I'm also a little distracted by this like DIY, like, you know, how artists actually do it, because the critics need to do it too. So yeah, it's a big field there. But you know, Boris, like I think we're going to come to this, but I'm curious when you're talking about praxis and like kind of grounding something, often it's a term that's just used that sounds good, and I don't know if people really do it. But the question that I would have around this would be like one of like technology and media. Like we've had, I mean, Livia's comment followed this a little bit, like how contemporary economics requires a kind of abstraction. And I think that contemporary society, in order to both to understand it, but I think it's a little more nefarious than that. I think contemporary society also encourages abstraction. And if you want to be really cynical about it, it's kind of like a Deleuzian, like decoding, abstract machine, deterritorialization of things that sort of breaks bonds and makes like new social models possible. So, but the question that I would have is like, you know, how is it that new technologies like JPEG technologies of compression, which like just simplifies things, how can we possibly link that to like older technologies and medias and to try to get our handle on it? Like, for example, I'm reminded in this conversation, I haven't read this in years, but this guy Walter Owen, who wrote about language, said that the movement from oral traditions to movable type, the separating the letters from each other out of the words made possible for a kind of abstraction that made abstract thought possible in a way. So how is the technology and the material things that we're doing, employing, how is the tools, the computer, the telephone, these things, how are they actually pushing abstraction and pushing us into a world more abstraction that's both positive in a sense that it opens up spaces of meeting, but negative in a sense that it kind of destroys previous social relations?
I think it's your question actually includes many questions, and when you trace, for example, futurist manifestos, they published more than 50 manifestos because they were busy with every media which appeared. They have even written the manifesto on radio. And David Burliuk also considered radio waves as being art itself. This is one thing that like any kind of media, artists are, with anything new, they are busy. And considering how to use it. And, you know, Lapotsky made his oscillograms in 1940s. You can find it in Victoria and Alberti Museum. That is the biggest collection of oscillograms. Then people were very much experimenting with music turning to light and color, like Wilfred's Clavilux and et cetera, et cetera. So the history of new media starts at the end of 19th century. In the same period, and this is the second part of answer to your question, which is questions, there is also this aspect of so-called vanity of an eye. There are several books written on this subject that the experience of the eye brain with decoding what is the falsification and what is real, especially in times of Victorian spiritualist photography, was enormously accelerating. So in between 1895 and 1930, people were much better in recognition of fraud. You know what I mean? Like all of these ectoplasmic photographs of late 19th century where people were completely shocked and believed in it. In 1930s, this was just a joke. So there is evolution of new media, but there is also these like homunculus, like plastic adaptation of the brain and our body to these new technologies. So yeah, like speaking about the pixels and JPEG, like what was like, for example, in pornography, you know, like when you see porn from mid-90s, it's so pixelated. It's like it's so retro, and so the sharpness of the image. Now we see that we are at the end of the sharpness, but we are not. So everything what was before we will decode as and recognize, like, you know, what is false, what is fraud, what is what. Huh? So this neuroplastic aspect of brain is or capacity of brain is really enormous as we see it from working with production of new media, if it's film or photography or digital. As I said, starting with oscillograms and the first experiments with computer and artificial intelligence in 1960s. So you see also the adaptation of the body to it.
We have another comment from John.
Yes. Curious about abstracting versus diagrammatics following the discussion of Clint. Could you speak more about the diagram in context, since its language is also mostly abstract? The difference between like the abstract as kind of like a general term and the diagram is that diagram tries to be the machine which not only describes like real components and dynamics in between them, as in Klimt, but also it tries to somehow to govern. Huh? Like the history of diagrammaticity, I don't know, since Kabbalistic diagrams of medieval diagrams, these were always made as a certain depictions of automata of machines, as also Deleuze understands the diagram. While like abstract is much wider field of things, components, methods, techniques, and etc. So, but what I was trying to say about Klimt was that standing in front of Klimt, like 99% of people will not try to read what she's saying, but will use it only as a irritant interface for their associative mental or emotional processing. And just to underline, she had very precise things to say, very literal meaning. So that's maybe where I see the difference between speaking about like diagram and the whole field of abstraction.
Rafael?
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I had a question, maybe more related to general considerations about abstraction and also specifically about, let's say, this type of etymological inquiry about the term of abstraction. Mm-hmm. And although we said maybe in art, abstract and concrete are not exactly opposites or contraries, I was interested also, let's say, in taking the term concrete, for example, and also submitting it to a sort of inquiry of etymology. And so what it means, if I understand correctly, is that it's something that grows together. And this I find interesting, let's say, in comparison. So let's say the concrete that has grown together and the abstract that has been drawn away. And in a way, it seems, I mean, depends on how we define definitions, but seems to me to help, let's say, discuss these problems of definition in the sense that we could say, for example, that concrete is the stuff that is immediate or that we take for granted or we take as already present, and the abstract as being the thing that we have to work towards, or that is the product of a technique. I don't know if it makes some sort of sense, but I would say, for example, if you take an example from art where you take the canvas and you take an unpainted canvas, there will be an aspect of concreteness, of leaving that as it is, as it was presented in this particular context of the painting. Whereas we could say someone like Mondrian, for example, abstracting from the landscape to make these geographical figures through a technique reaches a sort of abstraction. I don't know if it makes, I mean, if it's followable or not.
Oh, it is. It is, you know, but I mean, there are many ways how how these or that abstract artists arise to a final product, huh? Like there are many artists from Boccioni to Jackson Pollock who said that on the beginning they don't know what they are doing, but in the process of making it becomes concrete. Then there were many positions which were just spontaneous, which just made it and let it as it is. It doesn't matter if just a line or a splash or pattern. And then there were artists who had extreme theoretical background, like Malevich, for example, huh? And then were people who were very much influenced by spiritualism, huh? From František Kupka to Vasily Kandinsky and others. So, for example, like theosophy was formative for Kandinsky. Like Kandinsky speaks about abstraction as about a spiritual attempt. But we have to trace his history, because he starts in Russia as a communist. Then he is excluded and negated as artist in Soviet regime. But then also he's not accepted by German situation, because he's considered as degenerate art in 1930s. So what is the conclusion between this clash of, or what can be a conclusion between the clash of right and left wing problem? Spiritualism. So this is, yes, and then there are artists who are producing pictures as critique of, I don't know, mass production or commodity itself, like, I don't know, Liam Gillick, you know. So there is not one method. Then abstract art piece is made by adding something, by a certain constructive action, but also removing, like, I don't know, Robert Rauschenberg erasing Willem de Kooning, or Burri burning, or Lucio Fontana cutting. So there is no one method. There is no one meaning. There is no intellectual dominance over the primitivism, because, for example, like as I was describing briefly, those divergent tendencies of each avant-garde from inside, also in Soviet avant-gardes, you had a very strong so-called neo-primitivist movement, which tried to escape this like over-intellectualized constructivist environment. On one hand, to be closer to normal people, but also on the other hand, like to be to be very critical to constructivism and suprematism itself, as being considered as just a continuity of bourgeois language. So in abstract art, it's like so vast that it can't be described by like one position. Huh?
Yes, what I meant was not necessarily a type of method that would be the abstraction
Yes.
but more that what is abstract is actually where method comes in. Whereas abstract, like for example, if we take concrete poetry, for example, no, like
yes.
or let's say read concrete poetry, so not on paper but spoken, we Schwitters, for example, and we think of him as trying to go back to sort of the basic components of what constitutes his practice or the field of art in which he evolves.
Yes.
Of course, this involves a method in a way, but I fail to see maybe how it could be considered concrete otherwise, or if this concreteness is actually a hidden abstraction, or who says what. In a way. Or another example would be now that if we talk about paintings, is like Barnett Newman, for example. Where is he in that general discussion?
Yes. No, back to concretismo. Huh? I think this is something what is very interesting, because you have like a European concretist tradition. Speaking about poetry or visual arts, doesn't matter. And then you have the Brazilian neoconcretismo, which actually is a critique of European technocraticism and depersonalization. So the Brazilian neoconcretismo is using maybe similar strategies, but they are opening these strategies to personal and emotional expression, or even to participation with non-artistic participants. So yeah, concretismo, like the concretism is also like extremely large, a large territory, you know, like on one hand you have, for example, like if we consider Schwitter's concretist, let's say, or there was a Russian parallel which was called Zaum, Beyond Mind, with Chlebnikov and other poets, and then you have Antonin Artaud and you know, like and the absurd theater, and so he is the critique of you know, with Merz. He is he's very critical to consumerism. But actually, you know, in South America, with, for example, Noigandres, the consumerism is taken as potentially transgressive and subversive field. There were so many poems written on Coca-Cola, for example, you know, like permutations of Coca-Cola. So once it's something, there is immediately someone else from within the circuit of artists or trend or style who tries to deconstruct it. And it makes us being impossible to answer with simple answers, you know, because this is always spectra, and it's not finished, you know, like these kind of like, you know, deconstructive, destructive elements, or fragmentalization, fractalization, it goes on and on and on. And yes, concretism is a really, I mean, we can speak about concretism for 3 hours about, you know, particular actions within, for and against, and also like different nuances, like what that means, how it can be made. And then we will end with the group Zero, or with Piero Manzoni, you know, so structuralism, you know. like also back to this like aspect of but because this is also somehow also in your embedded in your question is like Barnett Newman or Rothko and etc. Also, Rothko had a very precise idea about what he is painting, you know? Like his last series was like pain and alienation and sorrow. So these things were, how can I say, kind of we can say very much 19th century romantic attempts of making picture, you know, like making the composition about some particular emotional state. And then cynical Frank Stella saying like, you know, it is what you see, which is again, it's not that easy, huh?
I might have a question actually. When we talk about art, can we abstract art, but in the contemporary sense, so second contemporary, right? Can we determine its quality? How do we do it? And is that like still a thing? You know, to even determine quality, because it's a big question. But what do you think about it? And how can we navigate the abstract art in the contemporary sense in the system we have now, the art system, art hierarchy?
You know, I mean, my kind of like a general position is that the contemporary art after 1989 is a territory without common critical categories, which means that it's not only impossibility of any unification, but all forces are against unification. So the question of evaluation and Michel criticism and speaking about what is good and what is bad is a kind of simple trajectory of ad hoc judgment and the more general consensus, which is accelerated by influential personas and institutions, which again, it is not a discourse which is purely about if the painting is good or not. Again, there are a lot of factors and stimuli and mechanisms which cooperate on final decision. So actually, back to Michel criticism and journals, is less and less journals, because a standard art press will write a review if you as an institution will pay advertisement. If you don't pay advertisement, they don't publish your review. So the spectrum of sources, but also addressees, like who is the customer of this journal, is much narrower as it was, for example, in 1970s. If we speak about journals, for example, like, I don't know, Art Forum International was a platform in like 1970s which brought the most revolutionary texts and even very extended, like long reads. It was not, economically limited. While today it's basically it's like Vogue of art. Like it's very much the in hands of those who can pay. You know. So that's my point. It's like, and when we are speaking, when to be responsible, it's about putting all of these aspects together to understand. Obviously, it's much easier doing it retrospectively. Why, I don't know, to explain or interpret why particular artistic position is successful, or and retrospectively we can like reevaluate, we can remap the whole trajectory and all of those stimulants which were on the way as to predict. This is it is complicated to I mean, yes, simply saying like I know a fantastic painter, but I know that he will be not successful because he is a very complicated person. Private galleries are fucked up. They are very much looking for easy solutions. There are very few private galleries which are open working with troublemakers. So his chance is getting smaller and smaller, and then also like the big institutional world, like museums and etc. Also because of all of those wars which are happening, like for example, UK has lost 1/3 of the whole budget for culture and education, also because of Russians and Brexit and etc. These institutions are getting so slow, so they don't reflect contemporary conditions anymore. Like each curator at Tate Modern has a particular sponsor behind, and if the sponsor is from Latin America, then obviously this will also influence what will be shown at Tate Modern. So interpreting these days, it's a matter of extreme complexity of political and economical data and prediction. And especially in abstract art, obviously, also.
I'm just going to ask. I'm curious what you. I was going to type this, but it's easier to say it. I wasn't able to access the syllabus or the reading list. I couldn't get to it for some reason. Could you just tell us quickly what you want us to do for next week?
No, actually, look, but it's not only on me, but I don't want you to do anything. I think it will be great if you maybe dig deeper in things which stay open on your side after our session, And the dog is here, huh? If you need the dog. And reading is to me, like, to tell you like what to read is really problematic, because there is the list of publications which are important is so long that that I have really problems in telling you like you have to read this. Maybe after I will select some article and I will send the PDF to all of you.
So the assignments and the final work are kind of open?
We have to ask also the new center, like how we will manage this. That to me it's kind of like open thing, and also it's a lot about kind of like a wrap up, which will be at the end. That speaking about evaluation, we will try actually retrospectively to evaluate together.
So you're not going to care if we're not an artist and we sort of talk about something else that relates to abstractness and systems and.
We will speak a lot about different things.
Okay.
Yes, because you know what is to me is principally important, and I just I just made a short sketch today about that. Is that there is something happening in the brain where you produce or absorb abstract art, or what happens when you are dealing with abstraction also in different fields with you. And this will very much come in more details with particular sections. Huh?
Okay, that I'm really interested in, but I'm not so interested in art criticism.
I mean, art criticism is also what we are doing now.
I got that.
Yes. No, I think, look, art criticism is, as I said, is that's something what actually we can't ignore, because it brings words. It brings words, and without these words, without critics, we will have not even a word cubism. You know, it was Vaxelay who was a journalist, and actually this was a pejorative critique of the first exhibition of cubists. Basically, he said like, only cubes. Fauvism, like beasts, like wild beasts, it was the same critique. So let's not ignore, criticism. Without them, we will be not able to be together and speak to each other.
Okay, I'll stay open.
Super, wonderful. Yeah.
We have 15 more minutes, so if somebody has any more questions, go for it.
I mean, just to go off the comment the question that you just posed, Anna, to Boris. And I did agree with what you said, Boris, about the state of criticism and institutions. But by the very nature of criticism being something that's been eroded away, and you're saying abstraction is going to be the dominant movement, or you see it just becoming stronger.
Yes.
Inherently, though, if you're saying, criticism's a good thing, but you're also saying criticism's been eroded, surely that means the abstract art that's being produced that is not it's not having any criticism projected onto it, is inherently going to be weaker. Because there is one thing you said, abstraction to get rid of objectivity, which I think in theory I agree with that, but in practical, and maybe it's just because I live in London, cosmopolitan city, lots of commercial galleries, and that's what I see. But with my own eyes, I don't see objectivity within visual art, and that's not just painting, that's any art being eroded. I see the opposite, or at least that's my opinion.
No, I mean, good point. What I wanted to say with criticism is that it is not disappearing, because for a critic or theorist, writing criticism or the work of theory or doing the research is inner urge. It's only that there is a new institutionality which, you know, has actually a boom, like with Substacks, blogs, Instagram, you know, self-published things, and many of these things they will be influential, you know. So and especially like speaking about Instagram, because Instagram is the moloch of you know, it's the attention whore itself. So it also very much stimulates those who are working with it being successful, you know, like to distribute their opinions as much as possible. What I wanted to say is that criticism can't rely anymore on a standard institutional grounds as we knew them, you know, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago, still functioning. They are not functioning anymore, I think. But this DIY, these like, you know, self-published trends are massive. They are really massive, and also some have even a sentiment to produce hard copy. And so criticism will not die. It only takes different forms. Then obviously it brings or it generates also new language, because new media also has a, you know, a different you know, linguistic logics and etc. etc. It speaks to different people. Yeah, definitely. And but this, like, you know, objective, non-objective. As we say that there is no necessary contradiction between figurative and abstract, and that the background of a lot of figurative is abstract. This is the same with like this objective or non-objective, you know, because even if something is like non-objective, it's like intangible or immaterial, it rises out of some source. Like radiation is not happening without the radiating source. So the relation between these like objective and non-objective will stay here. I only you know, predict and feel that this aspect of like radiation and immateriality, also in terms of like formal and media appearance in art, will become much stronger. It's like you know, like look how the visual or the figurative communication online has fragmented itself in the culture of memes, like memetic culture. This is not kind of like full frontal joke where two people speak to, you know, cartoon where two people speak to each other. It's multi-layered and already very fragmentalized and dynamic platform. And so I see here this evolution of deconstruction as well, as I'm speaking about, that this is something what is, you know, what is yeah, it is some kind of metaphysical aspect which always comes.
Peggy?
So I teach design, and a lot of students are starting to use AI in their design, and it's too refined for me. I really want them to go back to where I can see the hand of the human in the making. And that's really hard for me to critique, because I actually do critique when I'm teaching.
You see?
Yes, I do. So I really have to, I'm just not an artist. I'm a design person, which puts me in a different place. But it's so refined. I want to see them in it. I feel this way about pop music a lot of times too. I want to hear the voice. I want to hear the acoustic. I want to hear the imperfection. So when you're talking about deconstruction, you're sort of talking about that aspect coming back into making. And I'm sorry about my dog. That's why my sound is usually.
No problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I think about it too, that there's a gap maybe now that I think as institutions are losing a little bit of power, critique is also losing a little bit of legitimacy. And because it's being diluted in such a huge and massive, like you say, DIY movement of people self-publishing, but then that together with the rise of AI and a more like standard language starting to appear from AI that is not so much individual languages that are like finding their authenticity in self-publishing. It feels like there is a homogeneous thing being built with AI together with this dilution of institutions, and something that requires a little bit more of rigor maybe with like how the critique is being built, where is it coming from. So it feels like it's widening much more the gap for how really emergent artists can access these institutions. Seems since this bridge is getting a little bit thinner. I don't know if it makes sense what I'm saying.
Yes, but to me, one of the first crucial moments in the history of evolution of contemporary art is the salon, self-organized salon of Gustave Courbet, and he organized this salon because his paintings were rejected from an expo. And now we know it. Now it's a part of history. Then in 1960s, I don't know, Gordon Matta Clark and his projects with restaurants, food, or whatever. These were all self-organized things, and we remember them. And I feel that it's again the same momentum of that we have to do it ourselves, you know? It's not only that there is a boom of self-publishing because of objective reasons, but it's also time to think about like new structures, new ways of, penetration of media environment, and et cetera, et cetera. And then as we remember the Salon of Courbet, we will remember different critical platforms of today. You know what I mean? Like unfortunately, the responsibility is completely put on our shoulders. And we don't have any backup. We don't have havens which are pre-built. We have to build those havens.
Yeah, I'm all for self-organizing and grassroots movements, and I think there's so much power there. What I was trying to address is that, for example, in the past, when something would emerge and we would recognize the power of that emergence, there was not so much noise from something like I'm also very like tech forward too. I'm not like, oh, we shouldn't be using AI as much as we're using, but I think there is specifically to language, and we were talking about criticism. I think there is something that is happening to language and linguistics because of AI that is bringing things to like a homogeneous point, that it feels like the things that are emerging are not having so much power, that there is like some type of dilution that's happening before something can ripe up in their own matter. And institutions are even further away from like supporting any of that emergence. like I feel like there's something to language that is like, and maybe we don't understand yet, but that is shifting how the authenticity of things can survive its emergence.
Yes, but look, let's not be busy with the entire, history of humankind, but with like enormous industrialization in 19th century, there were also like a lot of contra movements or critical movements. So if you express a certain insecurity or dissatisfaction with particular things, it means that there are voices like you, and then which have already this like reactive potential, and the thing which you will like will be created anyhow, because like this aspect of action reaction, this is not disappearing, and also it's combined with existential urgency, so it's not only like, for example, like the to have a inner urge to be a critic. That means that I have to create a certain economical and financial system which allows me to be the critic. And this is already a very productive start. I made kind of extensive comparative study in between institutional critique in visual arts and comparing it with the production of so-called indie labels in pop music, late 70s, 1980s. And the crucial difference between these two movements were that in our sector, in visual arts, institutional critique was in direction existing institutions, while indie production of music was out of debate, but they were already doing it. They were doing new institutions. And this is a huge difference between these, between like discourse and doing things. So one thing is to learn from artists, like how they fucking survive. And the second thing is also to learn from pop culture, from like how these things are happening there since like 1950s, where jazz and reggae and ska culture, rocksteady, whatever, started to happen. So like the influence, for example, on British culture of those clubs in 1950s with so-called like modern people like listening to jazz was then enormous. It created fashion, it created certain aspects of I don't know, economies, financing, meeting, and then even it changed the so-called like racial profile of British culture, crucially. Huh? So I think it's about to start. I'm more on side of these indie music labels as on Andrea Fraser. I'm not a big friend of Andrea Fraser method.
But I'll just say, I mean, it's also like the model in which like artists make their own economies is we lionize it, but it's also kind of problematic because we show the way to be precariat and not have any health insurance and be hand to mouth. So it's not all optimistic to say
No,
that artists should be like model for DIY.
yes, but I'm telling it because of only reason that the theory and criticism is getting in the same shit as artists are for ages. And also like not to we can't be like very romantic. Also like many theories and philosophers or whomever, you know, they were not living fancy lives, you know. So, but artists, they prove that there is a certain, yeah, we can say sentimental system which keeps this bloody world of us still living. It's not institutions anymore, you know, it's not journals and existing magazines. It's not even a chain or network of private galleries. It's artists. It's artists who are, you know, keeping art alive. And in 19th centuries, it was only artists. You know, they had no support, you know. I mean, each individually. So it's learning from artists, you know.
So exhausted artists. If that's all, our time is up. If anybody has any question, maybe we can do a quick one, or if not, then we'll see each other next week. I'll take that as a no.
Okay.
Thank
Wonderful. Many thanks to all of you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Thanks, Boris.
Take care.
Bye-bye.